it's very much theoretical in the sense that we're gonna have to discuss a lot of topics and subdivisions within the section throughout this week. But nonetheless, trust me that we're gonna have a lot of practice because I was preparing and I will continue to prepare some material later on in the week that at the end of the week is gonna be very much helpful for you to practice what we're going to learn tonight and in the following classes, okay? That, as I say, it's gonna be more theoretical for this week at least, given that we are, of course, in the reading section. So great. So let me now share my screen and then we're gonna start, okay? Here I am, awesome. And now, okay, great. Let's start with this. Very good. So the speaking section. All right, better get rid of this. Oh, no, sorry, this is not the one I want to access. Okay, this is it. Okay, great. Oh, it's not this one. So sorry. It's the reading. This one. Okay, great. So what can I tell you about the general aspects of this section? I think that is, of course, our first step tonight. What I can tell you about this section, dear Claudia, is that the reading section is designed to assess how well you can read and understand materials in English. And of course, this section is always designed for some sort of educational or academic environment, right? As all the other sections in the exam. Now, in this section, you're gonna notice that the way you perform in this section is very much flexible, but nonetheless, of course, it has some regulations, let's say. And one of them is that you're gonna have to read from 3 to 4 passages, okay, in this section, in the reading section, because of course, right, you have to read passages in the entire section and then to respond to some questions about those passages. That is basically the overall, the overall task you're going to be performing on. And as I say, you're gonna have to read from 3 to 4 reading passages, and each of them is gonna be approximately 700 words long, which, if you think about it, is quite more than before, right? Because we have been reading material that oscillates between, I don't know, 150 words and 300 at a maximum, but now 700 words, of course, is gonna be a monumental difference. Now, as I say, you're gonna have to read these passages, and then you're gonna have 10 questions per passage to respond. And now, of course, let's say you have one passage, right? Like the first passage, and this first reading passage is, of course, going to be about the reading passage is going to be about some sort of academic material, and then you're going to have to respond 10 questions about that reading passage. For example, let us suppose that the reading passage is about, I don't know, the Bolivian independence wars, whatever. So when you read that passage, right, after you read, you're going to have to respond 10 questions about that same reading passage, right? They're going to ask 10 questions with regard to that passage you read on the Bolivian independence wars, right? So, and the same for all the other passages. Now, how much time are you going to have for the entire section? You're going to have from 54 to 72 minutes. I repeat, you're going to have from 54 to 72 minutes in order to answer all the questions in the section and to read the passages, okay? As I say, from 3 to 4 reading passages and 10 questions to respond per passage. Now, the entire and overall time you have for responding them all, it's from 54 to 72 minutes, all right? I'm gonna explain this further, so don't worry. Anyways, you're gonna be able to see it on the simulator, but trust me, it's very simple to understand. And as I say, it's way more flexible. The way you administer your time, you're gonna notice it. In the other tasks, we were somehow compelled to follow the times they gave us. But now we can, in this opportunity, we can, we can take it, or we can somehow measure it and use it by ourselves. All right, very good. So now the third thing I would like to say before we start with some more specific things is, don't worry if you are not familiar with the topic of the passage, because I know that in your case you are a specialist and a scholar on history. But what about biology, for example, or what about mathematics? Some people are worried about that because they say, well, I've never studied mathematics in my life, and therefore I'm not going to be able to respond to questions about mathematics, right? Or the same for people who, I don't know, yes, yeah, you hate sciences, okay, yeah, fine. and as I say, that's the idea. Like many people say, you know, I'm going to struggle with this because I have never really paid attention to something related to mathematics, for example. And what happens if the passage turns out to be about mathematics, right? So for Elsa, who has also joined us, I am talking about the general aspects. Yes, good afternoon, Elsa. I am discussing right now the general aspects of the reading section. And what I'm trying to express is that in this section, we have to read from 3 to 4 passages that are going to be about academic subjects. And then we have to respond 10 questions per passage. That is to say, if you read, for example, 3 passages, then you're going to have to respond 30 questions, right? So it's like 1 passage and 10 questions for that passage. Then a second passage and 10 questions for that second passage, and so on and so forth. So the idea is that at the end, you're going to have to read and respond this material from 54 to 72 minutes. Okay, that is to say, for responding and reading all this material, you're going to have from 54 to 72 minutes. Okay, and now what I was explaining here to Claudia is that sometimes people are worried because they say, you know, what happens if I don't know about the reading passage I receive? Maybe people are, I don't know, specialists on history or, I don't know, political science, but they've never liked, I don't know, languages, for example, or they've never liked, let's say, computer science. So what about the possible scenario in which, of course, the reading passage is about computer science or biology, for example? In that case, you shouldn't be worried, dear students. Why? Because all the information you're going to need to answer the questions will be included in the passage. That is to say, they are not going to be testing your knowledge, like your personal knowledge of those subjects. For example, they are not going to ask you, let's say, if you receive a passage about chemistry, they are not going to ask you to repeat by memory all the chemical elements. That is not going to happen. So you don't have to worry about that and to study the chemical elements once again. What they're going to do is that they're going to give you a passage. Let's say if it is about chemistry, about, I don't know, Mendel and you know, this very famous scientist, right? Who postulated a lot of theories on chemistry. If your passage is about Mendel, then they're going to ask you a lot of questions about what the passage said about Mendel, but they're not going to ask you something that you should know, like personally about Mendel, or they're not going to test if you knew about Mendel beforehand. The only thing they're going to ask about is the same information they give you. So if they tell you when he was born, if they tell you what he did, if they tell you what he studied, then they're going to ask you questions about those scenarios or those particular subjects. But they are not going to ask you something that it is not in the passage. You know what I mean, right? Like if, for example, if in the passage is never mentioned when Mendel was born, they are never going to ask you one of the questions when he was born, because of course, they are not giving you that information. The only questions they are going to ask are those ones that are possibly found in the passage, okay? So never worry if you don't know about the topics. So if you don't like mathematics or if you don't like chemistry, but of course it's plausible you're going to receive a topic like that, don't worry, because as I say, at the end, it's not, they are never going to test your personal knowledge on that subject, because of course, this is not an exam about that. It's an exam about English. Therefore, the only thing they want to test is how well you read in English. So they want to test your knowledge and comprehension of English. All right, great, very good. So what else? Now, there is something here that I would like to explain. Notice that it says from 3 to 4 reading passages, right? Each approximately 700 words long. Now, this is very interesting. Why? Maybe you notice here, it says from 3 to 4 reading passages. And then below it says from 54 to 72 minutes, you're going to have to respond and read this material. And maybe you are noticing, but why is there a variation? Why is it possible that I can receive from 3 or 4? Or why is it possible that I can receive whether 54 minutes for resolving all these questions or 72? Why is this variation happening, or what does it depend on? And now the answer for that is very simple, actually. In the TOEFL exam, there is something called the experimental version of some sections. And in the reading section is one of the parts during the exam in which this experimental version is most manifested. And what I mean is that this experimental version is basically a way that ETS has for improving their own material and exams. And let me explain it this way. If you receive the normal version of the reading section, you're going to have to read 3 passages. And you're going to have 54 minutes for reading those passages and responding to the questions you have for those passages. That is to say, 10 questions per passage, right? So as I say, normally, if you receive the normal version, the normal version of the reading passage, then you're going to have to read 3 passages and you will have to respond 30 questions in 54 minutes. Now, that's the normal version of the reading section. What happens if you receive the experimental version? As I say, that is a possibility. If you receive the experimental version of the reading section, then you're not going to read 3 passages, but 4 instead. And you're going to have to respond to 40 questions, of course, because if you have an extra reading passage, that means that you're going to have to read 10 extra questions, right? And you're not going to have 54 minutes to resolve this. You're going to have 72 minutes, okay? You notice the difference, right? Like if you receive the normal version of the reading passage or the reading section, you will read just 3 passages, respond 30 questions, and you're going to have 54 minutes to do this. But in the case you receive the experimental version, you're going to get like, you're going to get like 4 reading passages, 40 questions, and 72 minutes to respond, okay? And maybe you are asking, or you're wondering, why do you get like this experimental version? And the reason is very simple, actually. The reason why you get this is because, as I say, like ETS, as any other enterprise, you have to, or what they want to do is to improve their quality. And the way they do that is by using their own test takers to prove some new materials or mechanisms they want to use in their exams. So if you receive the experimental version, apart from receiving this extra quantity of material and time for responding in the reading section, you're going to receive very likely some new type of questions, because in the rest of the week, we're going to be talking about the types of questions in the reading section and the mechanisms you have for responding those questions. But given that it is a possibility you receive the experimental version, it's very much likely that you're going to receive, as I say, new types of questions or new types of mechanisms. If that happens, don't worry. Why? Because, dear students, as I say, this experimental version can only happen to you in one of these reading passages. Let me explain. As I say, normally you have 3 reading passages, right? And 30 questions. Now, if you receive the experimental version, you're going to notice that there is an extra passage and 10 extra questions. You can, okay, listen to this very well, you can receive this experimental version and the new questions and the new mechanisms, etc., merely in one of those reading passages, not in all the reading passages. Therefore, you're going to still respond to 3 of these passages and 30 of the normal questions. But if you receive the experimental version, you're going to respond to this, let's say, innovative questions they are testing, things of that sort. It's very, very much gloomy what they do anyways, because they never explain it very well. The idea, dear students, is that I don't want you to worry about that. Why? Because, dear students, if you receive the experimental version, it's not going to be punctuated. The experimental version, as I say, is merely a strategy they use for testing their own material. Therefore, if you receive this extra reading passage, as I say, you are not going to be punctuated in that reading passage. The only thing they are going to do, dear students, is to test your performance in the 3 normal reading passages that, as I say, anyways, whether or not you receive the experimental version, you're going to get 3 normal reading passages and 30 normal questions. And those materials, as I say, are available in the normal version and in the experimental version. So if you receive the experimental version, this extra passage and the 10 extra questions you're going to receive, that, as I say, could be different to what we're going to be learning this week, you shouldn't worry, because those 10 extra questions that are a little bit different to what we are going to be responding and learning about this week are not going to be punctuated. You are not going to receive any extra score or let's say, I don't know, punctuation for those questions, or you are not going to be somehow penalized for not responding correctly to those questions. So if you notice, your students, as I say, it's like it's totally irrelevant for your performance. The only thing that it does is to help ETS to, as I said, test new materials, test new techniques, new mechanisms, but it doesn't affect you. It's as if you were somehow returning them the favor they are doing in order to bestow all these credentials upon you and to give you international recognition, etc. they are just using you to respond to, let's say, new questions, new things for them to improve. All right. So that's the explanation for this. And as I say, you shouldn't be worried if you receive this extra passage. You're going to notice it. So when you're in the reading section, you say, oh, I received 4 passages. Therefore, you say, oh, this is experimental version. But if you don't receive that extra reading passage and those 10 extra questions, well, fantastic. You just perform this as we are going to be learning this week. If you receive it, don't worry, as I say, because at any point, this is going to be something harmful or disadvantageous for you in any possible word, okay? As I said, just perform on this as it comes to you, because if you receive this experimental version, it's not going to affect you nor negatively nor positively, all right? The only thing you have to care about is this 3 normal reading passages and the normal 30 questions you're going to receive, and that I will teach you how to respond throughout this week, all right? Very good. Is there any question with regard to this, dear students? Something that I could...
Yes, I
Claudia,
have
yes, please.
like the experimental passage is always in the final. Is the final passage?
Okay, good question. No, not necessarily. What they can do is they can insert it in the middle or maybe at the beginning. But the way you're going to notice it is, as I say, if you receive a 4th one, then you're going to say, okay, at some point, maybe I responded to the experimental version and I didn't notice it. But the only possible way to know it, or if you receive that, is that you see a 4th passage. Now, as I mentioned, it's totally random and aleatory if you receive it or not, and also the position in which this extra reading passage is placed is totally random. Okay, so you're never gonna like receive any type of let's say some sort of notice that says, hey, this is the experimental version, like the 4th one. Sadly, doesn't happen that way. Okay, dear Claudia, is that fine?
Yes.
All right, very good. Thank you very much. Great. Any other question, dear students? Something that I could respond? No questions? All right, great. Yeah,
Maybe
Elsa?
I can I'm worried. So if the test comes with 4 passages, how can I recognize which of 4 are the experimental passage to maybe to avoid to answering much better those questions. Instead, try to answer the best as possible the punctuated questions.
Yes. Yes, you're right. It's a very good question. It's a very good inquiry, actually. And sadly, there's no way, as I say, to recognize it, because maybe I tell you, you're going to notice weird types of questions that we're not going to be discussing this week, but probably they are going to combine, just in case, of course, one of you wants to like identify the experimental version. What they're going to probably do is to, as I say, combine normal material with these experimental questions or mechanisms, so that it's very much difficult for you to identify. But my honest recommendation is anyways, perform it. Like take any single reading passage as if it were, let's say, important or relevant to your punctuation. Because if you go about trying to recognize it, probably you get it wrongly. And what is going to happen, of course, is that reading passage you were not paying attention to was the one that was qualified and punctuated. And therefore you were not, of course, as I say, taking the right decision. So given that we don't have, as I say, they're very gloomy. They're very much, I don't know, even jealous about this information because they don't want to make it open. They never say how to identify these things. And I think that's because they want you to approach this section with all your effort, of course, because they want to give like an honest insight to see if what they are doing, it's fine, right? So try to do it that way. And trust me, and that's good because at the end, they give you extra time for that. So it's not as if you were being somehow, I don't know, harmed or, I don't know, like as if that were affecting you negatively, because they give you this extra time for responding that passage. Therefore, it's like, as I mentioned, it is not having any type of consequence in your actual performance that is punctuated. So I would recommend you very strongly to perform any single one of the reading passages. Okay, there, Elsa.
Okay, thank you. That's very clear, your recommendation.
All right, fantastic, great. So great. So what I'm going to do now is that I'm going to show you this in the simulator. And I want to ask you, please, 2 minutes. I want to go for my charger because my computer is about to to get out of battery. Just give me 2 minutes, okay? And I'm going to come back and we're going to start with the simulator, right? Is that fine for you, guys?
Okay.
Yes.
All right, very good. Thank you very much. Just give me a second, please. All right, guys, thank you very much. I came back. Here we are. Okay, awesome. So as I told you, what I want to do right now is to show you on the simulator how this section looks like so that you can identify by yourself all the different aspects, all right, of this. Yes, Elsa, please tell me.
Yes, what do you mean about in the slides it says endemic words?
Oh, okay, yes, I was forgetting to answer that. Very good. Thank you, Elsa, for the observation. Many people complain in the reading section when they do not understand the word of the reading passages they are presented with. And what people say is there any manner to look for the meaning of those words if I do not comprehend it? And what I would tell you is there is no way to do it because there is no vocabulary option in the reading section. Now, what there is in the reading section, and you're going to find, is some sort of glossary. And this glossary merely means for endemic words. You know what is endemic, right? Endemic means something that is, let's say, particular of a region or particular of a very much, well, a special group of people or, I don't know, country, whatever. The idea is that, for example, imagine that you are living in Europe and you are a European person, you've never listened about South America. But anyways, not everybody in Europe speaks English, right? So they are, of course, going to take the TOEFL exam as well. So what happens if they receive, for example, a reading passage with the word shaman? I guess that given that all of us are from South America and Central America, you know what is a shaman, right? Shaman is like a magician. So given that they are European people, of course, they're not going to understand that word, right? I mean, chaman is not part of their culture, not part of something that they should have somehow approached in their entire life. So in that case, or for any other type of endemic word, that as I say, it's particular of a region, of a society, of a culture, there is going to be a glossary menu below the reading passage. But just in that case, if the question, or excuse me, if the word is generic, like for example, if you don't know what it means to be, I don't know, in abjection, right? Abjection. I don't know if you know that word. It's a very complicated one. Abjection, which means some sort of very much downcast and in gloomy state of I don't know, moods or mental stability. If you don't know that word, but appears on your reading passage, you have no way to look for it because, as I say, there's no vocabulary or dictionary there. But these type of words like chamam or any other word that it is particular of a culture, a society, whatever, is going to be part of that glossary. Okay, because of course there's no way you should know that, given that you are not from that culture. Okay, that's what I meant. Very good. Let us come back then to what I was trying to talk about here. And as I told you, I want to show you the reading passage on the simulator. Okay, I think it's very important for us to do that right now. Okay, let me show you this, custom practice, then reading passage, and here we are. Okay, let me show you this. All right, start the session. All right, beautiful. So here I am. So look at this. So when you are in the reading section, what happens, guys, is that you're going to be able to see this menu, okay? Which is, as you notice, very much easy to understand, right? Here on the right side of your screen, you're going to have the reading passage. And you're going to be able to identify it because certainly it has a title, right? In this case, it says Corporate Charitable Giving. Now, look at this. In this case, you have the reading passage, right? And if you look at it, as I told you, it's a very long reading passage. It's about 700 words, all right? It's not something as short as we've been approaching before. As I said, it's a very long passage, all right? Now, apart from the reading passage that, as I say, it's always going to be related to an academic topic, biology, chemistry, history. In this case, it says corporate charitable giving. I guess it's about business classes or whatever. On the other side of your screen, you're going to get the questions. Look at this. Here I have one question. And as I told you, per passage, you're going to get 10 questions, okay? Look at this. It says question 1 for task 1. So this is the question number 1. And I want you to see my screen right now. And notice that this question, this one particularly here, it's multiple choice, right? Because as you can see and notice, I have to click on the response I believe is correct. And listen very well to me, dear students, all the questions in the exam are also going to be multiple choice. That is to say, you are never going to have to write your response with your keyboard. They're going to give you some options, a set of possible responses. And the only thing you have to do is to click or to select the option you correct or you consider to be the correct one. As simple as that. Look at this. For example, I have 4 different options and I have to choose, of course, with my mouse, the one that I consider to be correct. Look at it. Very simple, right? And the same is repeated in all the other questions. As I say, it's never going to be the case that you have to write your response with your keyboard. Never going to happen. What could happen is that instead of choosing one response alone, you will have to choose 3, 4, maybe 5 correct responses. But anyways, even if that is the case, as I mentioned, you don't have, okay? You don't have to write, you just have to select it, all right? Because as I mentioned, all are multiple choice, all right? Very good. So as I say, now look at this. There are 2 important buttons here. One says next and the other one says previous. And this is great. You know why? Because look at my corner here. As you can see, I have a chronometer. And in this chronometer, dear students, in this case, all right, you're going to have the chance to see your time for the entire reading section. And what do I mean by this? If you noticed, for example, in the previous sections, we were, for example, in the speaking section, you received at every single point a particular time for you to perform on the task you had. For example, if you were in the first task of the speaking section, you remember how much time you had for responding? 45 seconds, right? And then in the third task, you had 1 minute, etc., etc. Now, if you think about it, what they were doing is they were giving you the time. They were administering the time for you. Now, in the reading section, it's beautiful because you are the one who is going to administer your own time. Because as I told you, in the normal version, you have 54 minutes for reading and completing the entire material. Therefore, you have here your timer, and this is not going to stop until you, as I say, finalize the 54 minutes or 72 if you receive the experimental version. What happens is, if you look at this, that, for example, think about the possible scenario in which this question is very easy for you to respond. So you see it, oh, this is super simple. And you click on the response like that. And you say, okay, I got it. And then you press next, which is, of course, how you access the second question. How much did it take to you to respond that? Maybe 30 seconds. But what about this other question? Maybe you find this one to be more difficult. You say, oh, this is difficult. And you stay there for, I don't know, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, thinking about the correct response. So you respond at the end, right? You say, okay, well, finally I responded. And then you press next. And in the other question, as I say, you also find it very simple. And you say, okay, very simple. And in 10 seconds, you responded. If you notice, okay, as I mentioned, it is not as if they were giving you a specific time for responding each question. You can administer that. As I say, on the actual exam, this chronometer never stops. It does here because, of course, this is a simulator, right? But on the actual exam, this timer never stops. That is to say, you can administer how much time you want to, let's say, invest on any particular question. Maybe you can, let's say, respond the easy questions in 10 seconds. And for the difficult questions, when you find them, you can be there for 5 minutes if you want. But the idea is that overall, you have 54 minutes for responding all the questions. And you can administer that time as you wish. If you want, you can, I don't know, respond 29 questions in 1 minute and to use, I don't know, the entire 53 minutes for the last question. If you want, that is totally possible because, as I say, you are the one who administers the time in this case, all right? And now, another thing you have to see here is that, as you notice, you have a second button here. You have a button that says previous. Look at it. And if you press this one, previous, you can actually go back to the previous question. And this is something that you were not able to do before, right? You were not able, for example, in the speaking section to come back to the first task if you were in the fourth one. But now you can come back. Look at it. If I press previous, I can come back to the first question, etc. And what most people do with this capacity is to leave questions in blank. That, by the way, it's totally possible, dear students. Look at this. So, for example, if I am, let's say, responding to questions, etc., etc. So, for example, look at this question. I have not responded it yet, right? So, what if I say, this is a little bit complicated. I don't want to spend too much time here, so I'm going to go to the next question. But I will come back later to respond it. So you say, okay, you press next. And as I say, you go to the next question, but you can come back. So for example, when you respond this and the other one, if you want to come back to respond the questions you left in blank, you can do it. You just press previous, and you come back. Look at it, right? And the question is in blank, and you can respond it. Now, I do not recommend you to do this, okay, dear students. Why? For two reasons. First of all, trust me, it happened to me by experience. If you say, I'm going to respond this later, you are not going to be able to do it because you're going to run out of time. There is a lot to read and a lot to respond, and you're not going to have time to come back, okay? And probably you're going to forget it because you're going to be super stressed out for the next question, and you're not even going to have the space on your mind to think about the last question you didn't respond. Second reason, as you notice, you have to press previous. So for example, imagine that you leave this question, right? I don't know, the number 3 of the third task, and you press next and next and next, and you are in the last question, like in the question number 30 of the third reading passage, and you want to come back to the fourth question of the first reading passage. How many times you have to press this to come back? Like infinite times, for like previous, until you come back to this question if you're in the question number 30, because you could not, let's say, press previous plus 5 to come back 5 questions or something. No, you cannot do that. You can just go back question by question, like one by one. previous, 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 previous. So I don't recommend you to leave questions in blank. And actually, another reason is that, dear students, there is no a penalty for wrong responses. So for example, at some point, if you're undecided, what I recommend you is, okay, I think this is probably the right one. So I just press it and you go next. Why? Because as I say, there is no a penalty. If your guess, because you're guessing, right? If your guess was incorrect, well, who cares? Because as I say, there is no penalty. They don't rest a score or points in your average at the end for wrong questions. The only thing they catalog and the only thing they count is correct responses. Therefore, doesn't matter if you do not manage to guess correctly. So every single time you doubt, guess. Go for the one you consider to be the most correct one. Okay. And as I say, that is not going to affect you negatively. All right. Very important. What is next? What happens next? Look at this. And I think that's all actually. So as I said, 10 questions per passage. Let me show you. So for example, I am right now in the number 6 of the first reading passage. That remember is about corporate charitable giving, right? So if I continue next onto the question number 8, next, and then question number 9, next, and now notice, I am in the question number 10 of corporate charitable giving, right? Question number 10. This is the last question of this reading passage. So what happens, look at it, question number 10, right? So what happens if I press next? If I press next, I'm gonna receive the next reading passage because as I told you, we have 3 of them. It says the decline of the Maya. Now this is a historical passage, right? It's about history, the decline of the Maya. It's not about business anymore. So you're gonna have to respond 10 new questions about the decline of the Maya in this case, and not about business classes, right? Look at it, question number 1. And if you were wondering, you can come back to the first reading passage if you want, as I told you, previous, right? And now look at it, we are once again in the corporate charitable giving. But as I say, I do not recommend you to do this because it's very slow. And I just think that you should invest your time in things that are more appropriate and beneficial for you. Okay, so that's it with regard to the menu. Is there any question about how to organize and to administer this menu? Anything, dear students? Something, tell me.
For example, in this question, I can see more than 4 options. So that means maybe in some questions there are more than 4 options.
Yes. Yeah, you're totally right. As I told you, all the questions are multiple choice, but nonetheless, what changes is the mechanism to respond. Sometimes you have to, as I told you, you have to choose, for example, 1, 2, 3, and 4 responses out of 8 possible responses. Or sometimes instead of clicking on your responses, as we're going to see throughout the week, you don't have to click, but you have to arrastrar, you have to drag responses within a reply box. But nonetheless, as I say, the principle remains. All the questions are multiple choice, which means that you're not going to have to type your response, but to merely choose it, right? But yeah, it is possible that at some questions, the set of possible responses is more than 4. It's totally possible. Okay, very good. Any other question?
Thank you.
Right, my pleasure. Any other question, guys? Something else? All right, great. I think there are no questions. Wondrous. So next. Great. So now, in order to finalize, let me talk to you about what I call the Charles strategy to approach this section. What do I mean by this? You know it is, dear students. This exam has existed since 1964. Therefore, imagine the unperceivable quantity of people who have taken the exam, right? And the innumerable strategies and techniques they have come up with in order to respond to questions in the reading section. I want to show you the technique that I consider to be most accurate and, let's say, I don't know, ingenious for how to respond to the reading section. And this is called the Charles strategy, okay? So let us talk about it before we finalize our class tonight. So following this strategy, look at this. What you're going to do once receiving your passages is to go directly to the first question and use the passage to respond. not reading the whole passage first. Let me explain this. What most test takers do, and maybe what you were tempted about, or what you were tempted to do, sorry, was to, when you receive this passage, to read it entirely, and then when you read it, to respond to the questions. But let me tell you, I think this is not a very much advantageous approach, because let me tell you two different things. First of all, not all the paragraphs, because notice these passages are separated by paragraphs, right? As any other document. First paragraph, right? Second paragraph, etc. Not all the paragraphs are used to create questions. I repeat, not all the paragraphs are used to create questions. So for example, look at this question. It says, according to paragraph 1, what this is telling you is, hey, the response is in the paragraph number 1. So it could be possible that, for example, in the entire 10 questions you have for this passage, for the, I don't know, for the 5th passage or for the 5th paragraph, sorry, there is no question to be responded. So why would you care about reading this paragraph anyways, right? If you're not going to be asked about this paragraph, what does it matter? Now, what else? My strategy instead of that, dear students, is, as I say, when you receive the reading passage, what you do instead of reading the entire passage, right, as this, is to go directly to read the question. And when you read the question, what you're going to do is to use the reading passage to respond the questions. Notice a difference, because what many people do is they try to learn about this. And I think it's pretty normal. When they receive this, they say, okay, I have to read this because I have to understand it and to learn it. But that's wrong. They don't care about your learning on the decline of the Maya. What they care is how will you respond to questions. So the only legitimate use of the reading passage is to respond to questions. So why to read it if you don't want to learn about it? You shouldn't be trying to learn about the topic. The only reason you take this is to respond to questions. So as I say, in the charts strategy, you go directly to the question, okay? And then you use the reading passage in order to respond to the question. When you responded it, you go next. And as I say, the second question is going to ask you once again about the reading passage. And you use the reading passage to respond this. And notice, you have not read the passage yet. You have not read it completely. You are using it anyways to respond to questions. But maybe you're wondering, how is this possible? I mean, isn't this somehow disadvantageous for me? No, why? Let me show you. To follow this strategy is possible because all questions are released following the chronological order of the passage. Namely, the first question or the first two are going to be about the first paragraph of the passage. The third question about the second paragraph, the fourth question about the third paragraph, and so on. Therefore, you're going to be able to respond orderly without having read the entire passage beforehand. This is what I mean. Let me look at it. Look at this. As I told you, this is divided by paragraphs. And of course, the first one is this one, right? Then you have the second paragraph, and to here, the third and the fourth. It's always easy to recognize because, as you can see, there's a space right between the paragraphs. Now, what I can tell you is that I have discovered all these questions, dear students, as we respond and practice for the section this week, and when you're on the exam, are always delivered in chronological order. What do I mean by that? The first question, or maybe the first two questions, are always going to be about the first paragraph. Look at this. And how do I know that? Look at the question. Why does the author use the phrase specifically for historians in paragraph, what it says? 1. And this is the second question, as I say, question number 2. Let us look at the first question. According to paragraph 1, which of the following is now mentioned as an example of the advanced nature of the Maya? So as you can see, the same reading passage is telling you, hey, look at this. Like, this is this question. The response for this question, you're going to find it in the paragraph number 1. So there is no need for you to read all the paragraphs below to respond this question, because they are telling you, hey, this is in the first paragraph. Now, if it doesn't say, because sometimes some questions do not mention the paragraph where you're gonna find the response? Very simple, as I told you, because all the questions are always in chronological order. So for example, the first and the second question, as you notice, are about the first paragraph. What about the third question? The third question, as you can see, right, question number 3 is about paragraph what? Number 2. What can be inferred about the process of period of Maya civilization, etc. So as I say, at every single time, the questions are following this chronological order. So for example, if at some point you get a question that doesn't say where to find the answer, what you can do is to simply go previous and say, okay, my last question was about the second paragraph, which means that my next question is going to be about the third or maybe the fourth paragraph, right? Because you say, okay, in this last question I responded, it said that my question was to be found in paragraph 2. Now that I am in the next question, but it doesn't say here that my response is in paragraph 2, right? Hypothetically, you say, all right, okay, well, doesn't matter. Just go back and I see this, okay, so the last question was on the second paragraph. Therefore, my next question or my next response must be found in the second paragraph as well, or in the third one. Because I repeat, the questions always follow the chronological order of the passage. Is there any question with regard to this strategy, dear students? Any thing that I can clarify, Elsa or Claudia?
It's very clear, your recommendation. I have done 2 times TOEFL, and I made this mistake that you mentioned. I tried to read whole long test, the passage, and then try to answer. And for me, it was very difficult. I tried to understand I tried to understand the topic, because I thought maybe in this way I can answer better the questions, but no, it was terrible, and I got terrible answers. So it's very good, your recommendation, and I'm going to apply in the next opportunity.
All right, wondrous. No, thank you very much to you. Yeah, and as you say, it's a very common misunderstanding, because yeah, I mean, we are used to, like, as students, right? As people who like to read and to learn, we are used to receive material and to, I don't know, to digest it, like to read it and try to memorize it and to understand it. But nonetheless, in this case, the exam is not for that, right? Because we are not being evaluated in our knowledge of the decline of the Maya. The only thing they do is they give us a passage and they're asking us for, okay, look for the response in this paragraph and respond this question. It's super easy. At the end, the only thing they want to test is our capacity to understand writing English, that is to say, reading passages, and to see if we can, of course, identify some ideas right in the passage. But as I say, they always follow this pattern, so it's great if you can follow it. Okay, very good. So Claudia, in your case, any question?
Yes, I saw that in the reading passage, there are like a question to summarize all the passage with the by choosing the principal ideas. So how we can do that without like reading all the text in once?
Yeah, it's a very good question. It's very much legitimate. Now, there is no problem for that. And you know why? Because notice what I'm saying. I'm not saying that you're not going to read the passage. The only thing I'm saying is that you're not going to read it at first, right? That is to say, entirely, like before responding to questions. But you're going to notice that, given that, as I say, all the questions are in chronological order, at the end, you're going to have to read passage per passage to respond to questions. So when you are, for example, in this question number 4, you're going to have to read the second paragraph, right, in order to respond it. So at the end, normally 90% of the time, you read the entire passage. But as I say, the only thing is that you do it efficiently, because you are not reading before responding, but you are reading as you respond. So at the end, normally, you're not going to have any trouble for that summary question, because you're going to read the entire passage at the end. But anyways, even if you, for example, do not read, for example, I don't know, the 4th paragraph, because there was no question about the 4th paragraph, don't worry. Why? Because in the summary question, they are well prevented about that. And what ETS does is to give you options about the paragraphs in which you could possibly find a main topic, because when we come to study that part in our classes this week, the summary question is not about a summary in your own words. It's a summary with main ideas. And given that those main ideas, of course, are going to be in the paragraphs they ask you about in the questions, you're always going to be able to respond it anyways, because as I mentioned, you're going to have to read the passage at the end, but you're going to do it as you respond. So in the summary question, given that you read all the important paragraphs, you're going to be able to summarize the main ideas because you read those main ideas when you were responding. Okay. So as I say, there's no possible flaw in this strategy. Yeah, is that fine, dear colleague?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic, great. Very good. So, fantastic. So if there are no more questions, we're going to stop here. And tomorrow we're going to start with our journey to learn all the possible types of questions. Because notice, for example, as Claudia said, there is a question that is called summary question. And there is another type of question that is called the multiple choice question or the inference question. So we're going to discuss all those questions this week, all right? But for now, we have started pretty much what we had to. So we're going to stop here, okay? Stop my screen and let me please take your assistance as we finalize. And please help me with your kind responses, okay? As always, to our traditional poll. Right? If you have any question, any commentary, please, you are very much welcome to let me know. Let's see. Okay, so we got Elsa Maria.
Here.
Thank you very much, Elsa. And finally, we had Claudia Hernandez.
Present.
Thank you very much, Claudia. There you are. Great. So I'm going to see you tomorrow. So please don't miss tomorrow's class. It's going to be very important because, as I say, it's going to be crucial for you to, understand the theoretical background and basis of the questions, so that when we practice at some point during the week, you're going to know how to respond to questions you face. Okay. So very good. Thank you very much for your kind responses. And I see you tomorrow to continue. Okay. Have a wonderful night.
Okay, bye-bye. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much. See you.